Good evening and welcome back to the workshop. We're going to crack on today with continuing on the crank webs for the Maid of Kent. I've been doing some tidying up in the workshop. You can see the hoovers down there. That poor hoover. But I've been tidying up. And I had this box sitting down there underneath my little hearth for ages. And it's been piled. There's some boxes of materials that were sitting on top of that. So anyway, I started moving them all around and unpacking them and whatnot. And I thought, bloody hell, this is heavy. What's in here? I think we can agree this probably isn't my finest moment. Turns out I do have that rotary table. So I wanted to show you the result of all that work. Well, it wasn't that much work, but that work nonetheless. This is my rotary table, and this is a Jacob's chuck. Strictly speaking, this should probably be a collet, but I don't have a 7/16 inch collet which mounts into the mill. So I'm using the Jacob's chuck just for now. Because we're doing cosmetic features, it doesn't matter too much. But basically, I can now hold the shank of the fixture, and now if I plunge the quill, hopefully you'll see that it fits perfectly into that Morse taper socket at the center of the rotary table. Now I left the rotary table quite loose. I did this quite a few times until I got it fitting in that hole, and then I tightened up, and now I know that this particular fixture, when I leave it in there like so, that now has aligned the rotary table to the X and Y coordinates of the spindle. I can also use this now as a fixture to rotate my coupling rods around, for example. So I'm going to machine the outside of these coupling rods. I can use this. I can take it out and flip it upside down, and I need to deburr this a bit so it probably won't fit perfectly, but it can fit back in that hole. And now I can put the crank webs over it on the other side, and now I can machine the crank webs. So that was the whole purpose behind what I did. And yeah, it's not as elegant as a coaxial indicator, but certainly a lot cheaper. And I had this piece of aluminium knocking around, as you saw. So now it's time to practice doing some radial milling, and I'll come back to you. Now, with good reason, you may be asking yourself why I don't just use this soft Morse taper 2 arbor and do exactly the same thing that I'm doing with this piece of aluminium. I don't really have a good answer for that, other than I wanted to see if my little aluminium idea worked, and it does. I think this would be a little mini project in and of itself. I need to take off the tang at the end. I might need the angle grinder for that. But then, yeah, reducing this down to a very accurate 1/4 inch diameter that I can put in the milling collet or in the Jacob's chuck, and yeah, some sized rings, I guess, that can slot over this for the various things I want to fixture. Either way, this is back on here. Let's finish up those crank webs. must admit that footage was edited for television. My third rotary machining was okay. My second rotary machining was okay. My first one, however, was a failure. And if I bring this closer, you'll see why. I accidentally dialed in too much of a cut, and I ended up reducing the radius here by about 3/30 seconds over the nominal required radius for the edges of this crank web to be tangent to the ends. So I did think of various sundry ways to try and get around this, including reducing the size of the webs overall, making them teardrop shaped, but I think, after speaking to Mr. Crow, who is always sage and sensible advice, I just need to remake it. I keep learning the same lesson over and over again. In this case, that I should be locking all the axes that I'm not using. I was getting quite a bit of vibration. Everything was fine and manageable, and the surface finish was tolerable. But I've been traversing using this axis here, using this hand wheel, and not locking it. So then, as the cutter is traversing, there's a bit of chatter. Getting it locked down now, it's just so much more quiet. There we go. 4 crank webs. Well, I'm extremely pleased at how these have turned out. I've never had to try and match one piece to a set of others from nothing each time. Everything's been jig drilled, or I've been replacing the parts in the machine and so on, or doing them all at the same time. So I'm really pleased with that, actually, and yeah, quite chuffed. The next piece of work for the crank axle will be to machine the pins and the stub axles, and that's some fairly simple machining on the lathe over there. So when I get around to doing that, I'll whiz you through it, but I don't imagine that will rock many boats particularly. What I do want to do first, though, is take some time to adjust the milling machine, which is behind the camera, because as we mentioned, the gibs do need adjusting, and I don't want to forget about it or misdo it. I want to spend some proper time doing that. Doesn't really lend itself to filming, so you'll just have to assume that the remaining 5 minutes of this video would be me sitting in front of the milling machine, undoing up and doing up nuts and bolts. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.